Inheritance, an Upper Earth novel, Chapter 7, Games and Enigmas. The crush of schoolboys at the bus doors was 10 feet wide, and who knew how long behind? Tightly wedged between boys to the front, back and both sides, Ethan Banks couldn't even see behind him. What he could see was a sea of faces inside the bus, right up to the door. Nothing short of a miracle would get him on, but for now there was no way of escaping the tide of schoolboys surrounding him. When the bus doors closed and the cries of disappointment had subsided, the pressure of bodies lessened. Ethan pushed his way to the edge and out of the boisterous scrum. He had no wish to wait for the next bus and go through the same stupid ritual. He decided to walk home. Up ahead, a group of third-formers ambled along. He'd seen them around school, but it was an unwritten rule that fourth-formers didn't consort with younger years, so Ethan hung back. One of them acted like the village idiot all the way along the Banbury Road, strutting like a chicken and making feeble attempts at breakdancing. At one point, he even pretended to be a mime artist, mimicking his friends. Ethan couldn't help but smile. Then the Joker mimicked someone on the other side of the street. He set his frame into a rigid stance and walked with his head down, like someone who had something to hide. Ethan flicked a glance over to the victim of this portrayal. The mime isn't half bad, he thought, scrutinizing the man. There was something strange about him. He wore an army-style khaki woolen hat, which looked out of place for the mild September weather. The hat had been pulled down low over the man's head, like it was supposed to conceal his features. Noticing his fan club on the opposite path, the man turned his head and gave the would-be mime artist a long, hard, menacing stare. "I know you," Ethan realised. The hat concealed the bright blonde crew cut, but it could never hide his nasty character. Horst. Ethan slowed down. He had an overdose of Horst at home. It would be unthinkable to walk home with the man. Ethan found himself stealing along, hiding behind other people. Officially, Horst was his stepfather's driver, but his duties ranged from henchman to bodyguard and a number of things besides. Things that Ethan preferred not to think about. Strangely, the more Ethan tried to avoid being seen by Horst, the more Ethan watched him. And the longer he watched, the more curious he became. At times, Horst moved with a quick pace, then at others he dawdled or stopped completely. Just as the bridge across the River Avon came into view, Ethan noticed the new boy from school, Tom something or other, slightly ahead of Horst. Horst is following him. The idea popped into his head, but he tried to convince himself he was being paranoid. Why would Horst be interested in Tom? Yet Horst stalked Tom like a hungry crocodile gliding through the murky depths, across the river where the water frothed and seethed at the base of the weir, past the park with its green lawns and boats for hire, and into the old quarter of timber-framed buildings. Horst skulked after him. All the time, Ethan stayed on Horst's tail, keeping a safe distance behind. When Tom entered a cottage not far from Warwick Castle, Horst played a furtive waiting game, concealed behind a dense hedge of holly. Ethan left him to his games and headed home, mulling over the enigma of why Horst would be interested in one of his classmates. As a rule, anything Horst was involved in, his stepfather, Argyle Kane, was behind. Ethan had long wondered if Horst even had a life outside of his stepfather's employ. Maybe I should take a look in Argyle's study. As far as Ethan was concerned, the more dirt he could dig up on Argyle, the better. Ethan smiled. The following evening, Argyle and his mother had planned a visit to the theatre. There probably wouldn't be a better opportunity. Ethan swam yet another length of the pool. At the far end, Horst waited, his muscular body ridiculously large on the small wooden chair. Through his goggles, Ethan watched him bouncing his stupid ball against the wall. Bounce, bounce, catch. Bounce, bounce, catch. Horst claimed it improved his hand-eye coordination. When he'd completed the length, Ethan stopped, pulling his goggles up onto his head. Horst watched his ball bounce, caught it, and then clicked the stopwatch. "Oh, shame," he said. 35 seconds over. You'll have to do another 50 lengths in that case." The pool in the Banks family house might only be 25 metres long, but 50 lengths was a long way, and Ethan had swum 50 already. He knew he'd made good time too. Horst probably lied. Arguing would do no good, though. The more you fought it, the greater the punishments. He gritted his teeth, pulled his goggles back down, and started another length. As he swam, he vowed that one day he would have revenge. His stepfather, Argyle Kane, would pay for everything. Argyle had walked into Ethan's life 3 long years before. Ethan could never forget that day. It was the day his father died in a skydiving accident. No one had ever explained to Ethan how both of his dad's parachutes could have failed, or why Argyle had played the short-lived role of an adventure sport fanatic, unless it was to get close to his father. On the day his dad jumped out of that plane, Argyle had been with him. He had the opportunity to tamper with his father's gear, and he had the motive. Ethan's mother had been rich all her life, and for any man who wanted to gain wealth and power, she was a good catch. It hadn't taken long for Argyle to snare her. When Ethan had swum the final length, Horst stood up and stretched. "About time," he said. "Got better things to do than babysit some slacker." He winked and clicked his tongue before swaggering off towards the door of the pool house. Ethan gave a brief shake of the head. "Keep your cool. He'll get his. I just need to be patient." His dad, Craig, had always been big on patience. Rock climbing, his dad had once told him, is a great way to learn patience. You can't just charge at a rock face. It's like a game of chess. You have to think ahead and plan exactly where you're going to plant your feet and hands. That's what I have to do with Argyle and Horst. Plan each step. Ethan grasped the side of the pool and heaved himself up out of the water. If Argyle intended to break him, it wasn't working. If anything, the military-style discipline was making Ethan stronger. Most boys his age hadn't developed much muscle yet. Ethan had been fed a steady diet of swimming, push-ups, running and climbing for the past 3 years. At 14 and a half, he already had a lithe, muscular frame. He padded through to the small changing room, leaving a single trail of wet footprints on the tiles. Any one of his classmates would leave the wet swimming trunks and towel in a messy heap on the floor. Ethan knew better. He wouldn't give the gruesome twosome any easy excuses to punish him again. He meticulously drained out any excess water and hung them on the drying bar before dressing. It never failed to annoy him how much time it took to cross the full length of the house. It may have been paid for with his mother's money, but this house was all Argyle, from the pompous Roman columns outside the front door to the showy stone staircase that dominated the entrance hall. His father had taught Ethan that money didn't make a man. Someone should have told Argyle that. Ethan never invited anyone here. As a result, he didn't have any friends outside of school. But that didn't matter. He didn't want people to know where he lived. His 7-year-old sister, Amy, charged out of her room just as he reached the top of the stairs. "We have to eat with them tonight," she whispered, plainly horrified. "Why?" he asked. They didn't normally eat with Argyle or their mother. Most of the time they ate in the kitchen with Annie, the housekeeper. I don't know. She shook her head so hard that her blonde curls whipped across her freckled face. They're going out tonight, so they're eating early. A smile touched the corner of Ethan's mouth, which he quickly suppressed. Everything is going to plan. Later, he would make his move. It'll be fine, he reassured Amy. I'll be with you. At 6 o'clock, Annie called them into the dining room. On your best behaviour now, Amy, she said, with a broad smile. I made your favourite, roast potatoes and chicken pie. No need for you to go turning your nose up tonight. Thanks, Annie, Ethan said, and helped Amy into her seat, before taking his own place. The adults came in after a few minutes. Dressed for the theatre, they looked like the perfect couple, with Argyle in an expensive black suit and Ethan's mother in a midnight blue evening dress. It's all a big fat lie, Ethan thought, just like Argyle is. His mother's perfect blonde-tinted hair and manicured nails were the work of the beauty salon lady that came to the house, Ethan knew. He didn't recognise this version of his mother. No longer the fun-loving mum he'd known as a young kid, she often had a faraway look in her eyes. She spent long periods shut away in her room, and when she did come out, she virtually ignored Ethan and Amy. When she tried to take a chair, his mum stumbled. He shot up to help her. Sit down, boy, Argyle hissed, his piercing blue eyes pinning Ethan back into his seat. Roberta is quite capable, aren't you, darling? Why, yes. Her voice trailed off, as though she'd forgotten what it was that she might be capable of. Argyle had told them she was ill, that she suffered from depression. Ethan wondered, though. He'd seen the pills Argyle fed her with. She looked drugged, not ill. Dinner was a silent affair. The clink of cutlery against the white dinner plates took the place of any real conversation, although from time to time Argyle would rebuke the children for how they held a knife, how much food they put in their mouths, or whether they were chewing too loudly. When Annie arrived with pudding, the adults left to take coffee in the living room. Ethan and Amy heaved a mutual sigh of relief. Now we can be as messy as we want, Ethan said, picking up an overflowing spoon of apple crumble. He quickly added another to his already full mouth. Looking at Amy with goggle eyes, he slowly opened his mouth until it couldn't go any wider. Then he made a muffled growling noise, like some pudding-mad monster. Amy laughed so hard she lurched forward in her seat and sent a glass of water flying. It landed on a low table on her left, hit a lamp, and smashed into pieces. She shrieked in fright. That's torn it. Ethan closed his mouth and gulped down the food. All the noise was sure to bring Argyle back in. Ethan stood to clear up the debris. When Amy stood too, he shook his head. No, stay where you are, Ames. It was my fault. I'll clear up. Down on his knees, picking up the shards of glass, he heard the door click open behind him. Ethan didn't even lift his head, but continued calmly. He didn't need to look up to know it was Argyle. Whenever the man entered a room, it made Ethan uncomfortable. The hairs prickled on the back of his neck. Who is responsible for this? Argyle asked. I am, said Ethan. It was an accident. Look at me when I'm talking to you, boy. Ethan looked up with a defiant stare. If Argyle noticed, he made no sign of it. Accidents are caused by carelessness, he stated in a quiet voice that sent a chill down the spine. I do not accept carelessness in this house, and you will be punished. Horst will take you in hand tomorrow evening. A few more lengths of the swimming pool will allow you the time to think about your behaviour. He turned and walked away without another word. When Ethan had finished picking up the broken glass, he noticed Amy's face. Her eyes were brimming with tears. "I'm sorry," she blurted out.
"Oh boy,"
Ethan said in his best cartoon duck voice. "He can't hurt me. I'm a duck, and ducks just love water." Later that night, Ethan closed the door to Amy's bedroom and crept to the top of the staircase. He sneaked down the wide stairway that led to the entrance hall, then felt his way along the inky black passageway to Argyle's study. There he paused, listening for signs of movement. He knew that his stepfather should be out, but Argyle was not a predictable man. Turning the door handle, he expected it to make more noise than the simple click with which he gained entry. Well-oiled hinges prevented the door from creaking, and when it closed behind him, Ethan produced a 6-inch flashlight from his pocket. The curtains were open, and the moon cast a grey half-light within the study. A desk the size of Argyle's ego stood on one side, and Ethan began his search in the top drawers. They were of little interest, housing only pens, paper, and other office equipment. Upon opening the drawer below, he came across a handgun, lying next to small brown square boxes of what must surely be bullets. "Well, well, well," he muttered. "Argyle Kane, armed and dangerous." He slid the drawer closed and worked his way through the remaining levels. The desk was surprisingly empty, which could only mean that Argyle stored important documents elsewhere. Ethan scanned the room with a flashlight. Dark wooden panelling covered the walls, and at one end of the room, shelves were piled high with books. It was all for show. Ethan had never seen Argyle reading anything more cultured than a financial report. Ethan flicked the beam of light back onto the wooden panels. 5 or 6 months before, Horst had sent Ethan to this room with a package for Argyle. After knocking, Ethan had walked straight in and found the study empty. It had taken a few moments for him to register that noises were coming from behind the wooden panels, and that one of them wasn't sitting flush to the rest. If the office was equipped with a hidden cavity, Ethan knew it would be better if Argyle believed it to be secret. Ethan had placed the package on the desk and quietly slipped away. Now it was time to explore Argyle's secret hidey hole. Sliding his hands along the panels, Ethan put pressure on the wood to see if it would move. When he came closer to the window, he felt a panel move back under his fingers, and there was a small click. A door-sized section of panels clicked open and swung outwards. Ethan stepped inside. The space was only 3 feet wide, and at least 1 foot of that was taken up by shelves running the length of the wall, where boxes of files were stored. The boxes were marked alphabetically. At school, Ethan had made it his business to find out more about Tom. He now knew that his surname was Brigweed, so he pulled down the box marked B. It was an unusual name, but even so, there were a few files marked with it. There was a thin one labelled Tom Brigweed, but the largest file was marked as Alexander Brigweed. He looked at the small one first, and although it contained some information on where Tom had lived and who his family was, Ethan could see nothing of interest in it. He flipped open the second, larger file and began to read. It was then that he heard voices. Damn! He hadn't heard the car pull up, and the voices were coming from the passage outside the study. In the space of a second, Ethan switched off the flashlight and dived for the cubbyhole door, pulling it shut. A light switched on in the study. Slivers of light found their way through the wooden panels. There were no gaps large enough to see through, but Ethan heard Argyle's smooth-as-an-oil-slick voice and could imagine his cold blue eyes and shoulder-length hair. "How was the play?" Ethan recognised the second voice as Horst's. "Surely you didn't think I went there to wallow in the doubtful talents of Shakespeare?" Argyle snapped. "Well, no, of course not," Horst stammered. "The only reason for gracing this provincial theatre with my presence was to make the acquaintance of certain local businessmen who should prove useful to me. With that done, there was no point in wasting precious time sitting through the rest of that ridiculous mumbo-jumbo. Let us come to the point. If I asked you to meet me here, it wasn't to discuss my social affairs. Now, what did the solicitor tell you?" "For the moment he's not talking," Horst said. "But I'm paying him another visit tonight." "You're slipping, Horst. If you are not able to do this job, I will have to find someone else who can. I think I will join you this evening. If he does know where the ring's hidden, I'll get it out of him." "Very good, sir." "Well, what are you waiting for? There's no time like the present." Once Ethan heard the car start up and drive away, he clicked his flashlight back on and reopened the file on Alexander Brigweed. Many of the pages it held seemed to be a handwritten time log. The first column listed dates and times, while the second noted a 2-letter abbreviation, and the third provided comments. He scanned quickly over the contents of the folder. The logs went back years, decades even, long before Argyle came to live in Warwick. Ethan flipped to the front sheets, where the most recent dates figured. For all of the recent entries, the abbreviation read GP. GP, he whispered to the walls. It meant nothing to him. He scanned over a number of sheets until he found a change. In June, the entries had been marked as AB, and the final comment read, terminated. AB was a person, someone who died in June, AB, Alexander Brigweed. Ethan didn't need to read further. There was no doubt in his mind that Alexander Brigweed, whoever that was, had died under suspicious circumstances. Ethan picked up the folder marked Tom Brigweed. His eyes flicked over the information on Tom's family. In printed type, the file stated that Alexander Brigweed was Tom's grandfather. Has Argyle killed Tom's grandfather? And who was GP? Were GP and the solicitor one and the same? The last entry for GP stated, intercepted for interrogation. If the grandfather had been killed, maybe this person's life was also in danger. If Ethan could find evidence that Argyle was a murderer, he might be able to rid his family of him forever. He would need to tread carefully, though. Ethan thought about his sister, sleeping peacefully in her bed above. His face hardened. I will never let anyone harm Amy.